بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد خير الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And welcome to lesson 4 in the study of Surah Yusuf. Alhamdulillah. It seems that we may be having some trouble with sound right now, so let me see if I can fix that first. Let's see here. My mic is muted. Wasn't muted. It's actually. Can anyone please type into the comment section if you're able to hear me? Let me see if I type it. Maybe ask me. Yeah, can you hear me? Anyone hear me? If that helps. All right. Still waiting. I'll just wait a couple minutes to make sure that the sound is okay. I don't see why. Okay. All right. I'm there now. All right. So today, inshallah, we're going to begin from verse 58, but just a quick recap of what we covered yesterday. So Yusuf alayhi salam was accused by his mistress of an attempted rape, we know, and when he refused to obey her commands and her advances, she eventually convinced her husband, the Aziz, the grandee, to send him to prison. So Yusuf goes to prison, and he meets in the prison two men. Those two men, they worked for the king, who was actually the superior of the Aziz. And while in the prison, Yusuf had been very busy doing things which were revealing just how special he was to those people. And these two men, unsure of what their fate was, they came to Yusuf and asked that they, that he interpret dreams that they had, right? And so one of them had a dream about carrying, squeezing grapes. The other had a dream about carrying bread on his head, and the birds were eating from those baskets. And so Yusuf, he mentioned fundamentally that the one who saw himself squeezing grapes, that he would eventually find his way back to the king's castle, and he would serve the king, and he would be in charge of his drinks. Once again, the other would be crucified, and the birds would eat from his head or eat from his body. And so he says to the one who he was certain was going to survive, to mention me to your master, meaning mention me to the king, tell him about my plight and how I ended up here due to these false charges. And then we know the story is eventually, after 7 years, the king, he has at least one or two different dreams. And in those dreams, he gathers all of his wise men, calls them together, and he asks them whether or not any of them knew how to interpret his dreams. They basically said, well, this is too confusing. We don't have the power to know. And at that moment, the man, the Saqi, the individual, the cupbearer, remembered that his promise to Yusuf, so after 7 years. And so he said, oh, Yusuf would know. So he goes back to the prison and he asks Yusuf for the interpretation of that dream so they can return to the people and they would know exactly what the dream meant, what the dreams meant. So he goes back to the king. The king is impressed by this interpretation. He tells him that the interpretation came from a prisoner who used to be the servant of the Aziz, who was placed into prison for an accusation. The king wants to meet Yusuf as a result of this, right? So, but before Yusuf was willing to come out of the prison, according to the Quranic story, he demanded that an investigation be done with respect to the woman who accused him so that he can clear his name. So he didn't want to come out of prison without having his name cleared. So the king, he did this, he approached those women, and then they confessed that, yes, that it was, we don't know any evil, any ill of him. He's not an unrighteous man, and then the wife of the Aziz, he also confesses and says, I was the one who came after him, and so now Yusuf is out of prison. So he's set free, and not only set free, more important than that, his name is cleared. So he doesn't have to sign into some type of special database, like we have today with convicted rapists and child molesters. So every time they go to a place and they're supposed to enter a particular database, and then we know, and the neighbors are supposed to be informed or alerted in some particular fashion that there's an individual who was guilty of some type of molestation or rape, and who lives in your vicinity. So just be aware, be on alert, right? Shouldn't have to worry about that, so he doesn't, so the accusation doesn't follow him, right? And so the wife of the Aziz, or Yusuf, says in Surah, or in verse 52, this is to let him know I did not betray him in secret. So again, if this is the wife of the Aziz, so what she means is she didn't betray her husband while he was absent. Or it could mean that she did not betray Yusuf, right? So Yusuf should know that I did not betray him in his absence, right? But of course, another opinion, perhaps even stronger, is that Yusuf is the one speaking in this situation, where fundamentally he says that this is so that he, meaning the Aziz, that I did not betray him in his absence. And also that he'd know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not guide the planning of the betrayers, right? So which includes him, includes the Aziz himself, right? So I say we started at 57, but actually 53 is what I meant to say, So, but then after this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِسُوءٍ إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبِّي إِنَّ رَبِّي غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Yet I do not exonerate myself, for the self is certainly compulsive with evil unless my Lord has mercy. For my Lord is most forgiving, most merciful. Now, again, the question comes up in the Tafsir is, who's speaking here? Is this still the wife of the Aziz speaking? In other words, to say, well, so he doesn't know that, so he would know that I have not betrayed him in his absence. But of course, she clearly did betray him because he tried to pursue another man. And as mentioned before, the Aziz is either an individual who is extremely forbearant with his wife, right? Or he himself just lacks, the prerequisite amount of jealousy necessary for a husband to have, right? So he sort of let her get away with things, right? But is she speaking? If she speaks and says, I do not pardon or exonerate myself, I do not declare myself to be innocent. I do not, in other words, yes, that there's definitely something there. Inna nafsa la'ammaratun bisu, because the nafs, the self, is certainly compulsive with evil, or the self commands to do evil, right? The self, right, as a general, principle, that the self will command you to do things that actually are wrong, they're wrongdoing, So in that sense, fundamentally, she's saying that yes, that I didn't do anything, but I wanted to do it, right? Because the nafs, that's just the nature of the nafs, it's amara, right? Or we can say this is the state of the self, right? Or when I was involved in what I was involved in, my particular nafs was in the state of amara. And we know the Quran, it utilizes different adjectives with respect to the nafs at times, So sometimes the nafs is lawama, like right, we find in Surah Al-Qiyamah, لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة. So we swear by the self-reproaching soul, right? The soul that feels guilt, right? But also the nafs is mutma'inna. أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. Right? So the nafs can be tranquil soul, right? This is, of course, considered to be the point when an individual ascends in their spirituality to the point that they have good mastery over their emotions and their passions, their desires, right? But the nafs can also be radiya or mardiya, right? So the different states of the soul that the Quran speaks about, and that many of the ulama have, extracted or extrapolated out from the Quran itself and made them into a sort of a list to represent the degrees of taqwa or enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment that one can ascend to. But in this case, that the speaker, be it Yusuf or be it the wife of the Aziz, Zulaykha, she is either saying, the nafs itself, meaning my nafs, is ammara biso illa su'i illa man rahima rabbi. Except unless my Lord has mercy. And this ma rahima, the ulama say that fundamentally, or the mufassirun mentioned that this ma rahima rabbi is either to say that Allah, this is respect to time, right? Except for the times, illa fi waqt rahmati rabbi, except in certain times Allah's mercy will actually make the nafs not ammara, make the nafs not command one to do evil, to do things that are shameful, right? And the nafs ammara to bisu, so that if we say it's the reference to Zulaykha, then clearly we understand, But if we say that this is Yusuf alayhi salam, that ulama say that either Yusuf, what he's fundamentally saying is that he himself, as a human being, naturally had the desire to be with a woman, right? However, he did not have the desire to commit zina, right? And so the nafs itself, ammaratun bisu, because that's the state of the nafs. Even the, his nafs, it could be on that level, right? That is calling him to do so. Illa ma rahima rabbi, except for the times when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his mercy overwhelms, right? In other words, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevents, he brings his esma upon the individual, because Yusuf alayhi salam is ma'soom in the ithm, and that means that Allah protects him from committing sin, right? So either he's saying that yes, he had the urge to do something, but it wasn't zina, right? He had the urge to do what a man would want to do with his wife, right? But it's just that he refused to do so with that particular individual. Another way that they interpret this is to say that when he says inna nafsa la ammaratun bisu'i, that fundamentally what he's saying is that the soul, as a general principle, right, with regard to most people, right, is ammaratun bisu'i. For that reason, he said ma ubarri'u nafsi, and so ma ubarri'u nafsi, I don't consider myself to be guiltless, considering the fact that when I was in prison, instead of me asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to liberate me, I actually asked a human being to ask the king to liberate me, right? Because that can be another way that is interpreted as well. Inna rabbi ghafurur rahim, for my Lord is most forgiving, most merciful. وقال الملك ائتوني به أستخلصه لنفسي فلما كلمه قال إنك اليوم لدينا مكين أمين. Now the king said, bring him to me, I will reserve him for myself. Then when he spoke to him, he said, today you are secure and safe with us. ائتوني به أستخلصه لنفسي. Yes, it's jawab, أستخلصه لنفسي. And from أستخلص طلب الخلاص, that I will seek his liberation myself. Right? Bring him to me, I will establish or seek his liberation myself. Or astakhlisu, meaning I will make him khalis min khasati, min khalisi ashabi, right? In other words, that I will make him among those who are close to me. That's fundamentally what the king says in this situation. فَلَمَّا كَلَّمَهُ قَالَ إِنَّكَ يَوْمَ لَدَيْنَا مَكِينٌ أَمِينٌ. And once he spoke to him, meaning once the king spoke to Yusuf, he said, you today are secure, makin amin. Right. So remember, when we go back to the beginning of the surah, and it was mentioned more than once, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he was planning, that he said, وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف. So once Yusuf was sold into slavery, he said that, and thus we gave makan and makana to Yusuf, makanna li Yusuf, right? Yes. In other words, through him now becoming a captive and has been made into a servant, a slave, right? So fundamentally, Allah was speaking about the future, right? So he spoke about it as if it's already happened, but it was islaqul Shay ala ma yu'ulu ilayhi, a metaphor. So when something's definitely going to happen, Allah often speaks about it as if it's already happened, right? So here now we see the manifestation of this. So the king says to him, "You are now makin," right? It's a cognate of makkana yumakkinu, right? That you're makin, that you are firm, you're secure, you're in a place of stature, right? And you're also amin as well. Makin amin, you're trusted as well, right? So he says safe, translates secure and safe with us, but now makin amin as well, that you're a trustee as well. But then Yusuf, because understanding that the king is going to appoint him, grant him an appointment, because naturally, of course, he's been punished, right? He's been punished unjustly. He's placed in the prison, right, by the Aziz, who is the second in charge, second in command to the king. And so the king wants to make amends. He wants to redeem, not only help him be redeemed, but also to grant him some type of reparations, right? So this becomes his reparations, that Yusuf, okay, now you're going to be a trustee as well, one of my trustees. And so Yusuf, he chooses what he wants to do. He says, قَالَ اجْعَلْنِي عَلَى خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ إِنِّي حَفِيظٌ عَلِيمٌ. He said, Joseph said, put me in charge of the storehouses of the land. I'm very attentive and very expert. So place me ala khaza'in al-ard. Khaza'in is the plural of khazina. Inni hafidhun, I mean I'm a hafiz. Alimun, alim, right? So, and it's an emphatic form. Fa'il is an emphatic form, but sometimes it's a noun which sometimes is translated as ismul fa'il and other times as ismul maf'ul. Hafidhun can be hafiz or mahfuz. Alimun can be alim or ma'lum, right? So in this case, it's understood that he's hafiz, that he is an individual who actually protects things. He's very good at protecting things. And he's alim, he's also very learned, right, and things. And how did he get that knowledge? Because he's already served the Aziz. He's been accustomed to protecting things, preserving things, and also he's been given knowledge by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So he chooses what he wants to do. And what we'll note is that prior to this, the Aziz was responsible for the same thing, right? So Yusuf fundamentally is asking him to place him over the storehouses of land. After we give him similar position that the Aziz had, and then the Tafsir mentions that the Aziz was actually removed from his position and post, and Yusuf was given his post instead. So what a deserving recompense on his part, right? So put me in charge of the storehouses of the land. I'm very attentive and very expert. وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَتَبَوَّأُ مِنْهَا حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ نُصِيبُ بِرَحْمَتِنَا مَنْ نَشَاءُ وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Thus did we establish Yusuf on the earth. He lives anywhere he wanted. We pour our mercy on whomever we wish, and we do not neglect the reward of those who do good. And so كَذَلِكَ, so in this way, مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف. So again, Allah said he already said he مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف, كَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف, right? We are before, and then we are taken into captivity, but now he mentions again, كَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف. In this way, we realize our promise, right? Of giving Yusuf makan and makana in the earth, يَتَبَوَّأُ مِنْهَا حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ, that he shall reside in or locate himself in the earth, حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ, wherever he pleases, right? So in other words, he goes from, again, he's a prisoner of the well to become a prisoner of the prison, the dungeon, and now he's free to do whatever he wants to go, wherever he wants to go. Now, an important question I think that someone might ask here is that, well, why didn't Yusuf decline the offer by the king to become his second in command, right? Because clearly he's been away from his family for a very long time, and so one would imagine that he misses his family, he misses his mother, he misses his father, and he wants to see them again, right? After such a long time, right? But he actually chooses to accept the invitation, right? And perhaps the reason is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he told him to. And so he's not in a rush to head back there, And it's also interesting about slavery in the past too, is that what it appears, and I think there's very strong evidence to support this assumption or presumption perhaps even, is that people are slaves in the past. When people are slaves in the past, they didn't often attempt to escape, right? Unless, of course, we know the American history, and there are many reasons why, that slaves in America were trying to escape. Often, your free people were being enslaved, But Yusuf also was a free man, he's enslaved as well, right? But he actually didn't choose to escape. He didn't flee, right? Because at any time he could have eventually located someone and say, "Hey, well, how do I get back to Canaan? I want to get back to my family. I'm a free man, and I was taken into captivity. I was sold into slavery, and I should be free." But at no time do we notice during his life in Egypt, at least in the story itself, doesn't mention that he actually had the desire to make it back there. But here, what fundamentally happens is that the king makes this offer, and then Yusuf, he accepts the offer, but then says something specific, which is that I would like to play this role. Now, the ulama say that when an individual, when the people or the individual who is looking or considering granting you a post is not aware of what your skills are, it's permissible for you to actually to sell yourself, for lack of a better expression, right? As we know, the idea of selling yourself. So Yusuf here basically said, well, this is what I'm qualified to do, right? You should give me something connected with what I'm qualified to do. And there's actually a discussion about, okay, well, how can Yusuf alayhi salam actually live under the authority of a kafir, of a non-Muslim, right? This king is not a Muslim, at least it's not believed to be. And the Tafsirs actually say that Yusuf converted him to the religion of the Millah of Ibrahim. But then others, other opinions say that, well, he never converted or didn't convert as a result of that. But Yusuf is living under his authority, but he's the most powerful, or the second most powerful man in Egypt now, right? So fundamentally, his situation is one where Yusuf sees a maslaha, or that the greater interest is in actually having himself in charge, right? Than to actually give it to someone else, right? Because of oppression and what he knows was about to come. Because remember, the king's dream is going to come true. That 7 good years followed by 7 bad years of famine and drought, and then 7 good years once again, right? Yeah, or the good times will come back eventually once again after that, the end of those 7 years, right? So he says, "Nusibu Allahu nusibu bi rahmatina man nasha," and we strike, we hit with our mercy whomever we please. Right? So it's really interesting. So Allah, is as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually saying that this position or this assignment that's been given to Yusuf is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we assign it, or we strike and we hit with it anyone we please. وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and we do not allow the reward of the good doers to go to waste, right? We don't squander the reward of the good doers, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards those who good often in this life as well. It's not only in the hereafter, but this becomes okay because Yusuf was a muhsin, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay, this is your reward for your ihsan, for your restraint, for your sabr, for your temperance, your forbearance, all of these things, then this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him. But then he says, وَلَا أَجْرُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. Yet the reward of the hereafter is certainly better for those who have faith and who are conscientious. Right? So yes, your reward, this is a reward for the dunya, but the reward of the hereafter is even better for those who have iman and have taqwa. For those people of iman and people of taqwa, the reward of the hereafter is even better than the reward in this life. وَجَاءَ إِخْوَةُ يُوسُفَ فَدَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ فَعَرَفَهُمْ وَهُمْ لَهُ مُنْكِرُونَ وَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُم بِجَهَازِهِمْ قَالَ ائْتُونِي بِأَخٍ لَكُم مِّنْ أَبِيكُمْ أَلَا تَرَوْنَ أَنِّي أُوفِي الْكَيْلَ وَأَنَا خَيْرُ الْمُنزِلِينَ فإن لم تأتوني به فلا كيل لكم عندي ولا تقربون قالوا سنراود عنه أباه وإنا لفاعلون. So now enter the brothers of Yusuf. So remember, so what happens here is that Yusuf becomes the king. The 7 years, the good years, they pass. And now we've entered into the 7 bad years, the years of famine and drought. Now, they live in Canaan, right? but he lives in Egypt, but everyone's affected. The people of Sham are affected by this. People of Jordan, Egypt, they're all affected by this particular season, right? So fundamentally, most people are in search for grain, right? And they can't grow anything, right? They maybe get other things, but grain is comes, or their staples, right? Is extremely important, So fundamentally, the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, he tells his son to head to Egypt so that they can see if they can find some grain, because word is out that because of the plan, the idea, or the interpretation of the dreams of the king, that Egypt actually has good stockpiles, right, of grain and other things, right. So because of Yusuf's direction, now people come to Egypt, but when they come, they're just not freely given, but they have to pay for those things. They have to trade and barter things for the grains they're going to go back to. So the general rule is that every man, per person, any person who comes with a donkey or with a camel, that you get either a camel's load or a donkey's load of grain that you can take back with you to your village or your city, wherever it may be, right? So the brothers of Yusuf, they come. So then Joseph's brothers came and entered his presence. He recognized them, but they did not know him. So remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so when Yusuf was in the well, he comforted Yusuf by fundamentally saying that, and we revealed to him that, that you will inform them of this, that you're going to remind them and mention this to them, know that when and they themselves are not going to know. You're going to remind them that day is coming, right? But here, right from the beginning, they don't recognize him, but he knows who they are, right? Some say it's because of the way that Yusuf was dressed. Of course, aging, all of them are aged naturally, right? So it could just simply be that, okay, maybe Yusuf has a very large beard, and they really can't tell, they don't know, right? But he's, they wouldn't imagine that he would have made it, this far. They assumed that he was dead. The father, Yaqub alayhi salam, wasn't certain, right, but had hope that he was still alive because of the dream that Yusuf had told him of at the very beginning of the surah about, they had this dream. There are 11, stars, and they're the sun and the moon. They're prostrating to me. And so that had not come about, so perhaps, Yaqub, he entertained the possibility that maybe he misinterpreted the dream, but if he interpreted correctly, then that would mean that Yusuf would have to be alive, and that it's just a matter of time before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reunites them, right? So the brothers, they come, they don't know who he is, but Yusuf is now, he's in charge of Egypt. He's in charge of the storehouses, khaza'in al-ard, right? The storehouses of the food, etc., etc. So anyone who wants food, they have to come through Yusuf. They have to meet with him, and he'll make the arrangement. And when he had provided them with their supplies, he said, "Bring me a brother of yours from the same father. Don't you see that I give full measure, and I am best of hosts?" Right? لَوَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُمْ بِجَهَازِهِمْ أَوْ بِجِهَازِهِمْ قَالَ ائْتُونِي بِأَخٍ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَبِيكُمْ. Right? So bring me a brother from your father. أَلَا تَرَوْنَ أَنِّي أُوفِي الْكَيْلَ وَأَنَا خَيْرُ الْمُنزِلِينَ. Right? So of course the Quran doesn't fill in the blank here. So you have to read the Tafsir and other sources to actually know exactly what's happening here, because it may seem a bit unnatural that Yusuf would ask them this question. Now, how does Yusuf know that they have another brother? Well, the story goes is that because there are 10 of them who come into Egypt, right? 10 men, right? And this itself wasn't normal, right? During that time. People might have a lot of children, but usually it would be a mixture, right? Girls, boys. But now you have 10 boys, 10 large men, attractive, physically fit men. They come into Egypt all together through the same gate. And so now Yusuf takes advantage of what this looks like, So fundamentally, according to the Tafsir, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders him to sort of not reveal himself, but also to do his own use a type of cunning and everything as a way to teach them a lesson, right? So fundamentally, what Yusuf said to them is that, you're spies. You've come here to the city. Who are you people? You're spies. You're here to try to figure out what parts of the city or what areas in the city are undefended, Right? He says, no, sir, no, your majesty, that's not what we're here for. We're like everyone else. We're poor, and we just want to be given some of the grain that you have. We want to trade with you so we can take some of the grain back to our family. And he insists, no, you have no, I don't believe you. So they give a lot of detail about themselves. I say, where you come from? He asked them questions. Who your parents? Are they still alive? Is your dad still alive? Do you have any other siblings? And so they answer all these questions because they had said there were 12 of us. One of them is gone. He's dead. And then we have another brother, a youngest brother who's at home. So this is why Yusuf asked him, okay, well, I want you to bring me a brother of yours, right? Abiko, I want you to bring your brother. So don't you see that I give full measure and I am a best of hosts? So fundamentally what he does is that Yusuf, unlike with other people, because all 10 of them are together, and he saw that, and the people saw, the people saw that there was something strange about this. Yusuf actually invites them, and he actually treats them to a type of lunch or a type of meal, right? And during that meal, then he gets all these details. Of course, he said he's very harsh, right? He's harsh with them, but he does like take them in, right? Despite everything. That's why he said, "Ana khairul munzilin." I'm a best of hosts, right? So. فَإِن لَمْ تَأْتُوا بِهِ فَلَا كَيْلَ لَكُمْ عِنْدِي, right? وَلَا تَقْرَبُونَ. It said, so if you don't bring him to me, then I have nothing for you, and you will not get near me. They said, قَالُوا سَنُرَابِرْ عَنْهُ أَبَاهُ وَإِنَّا لَفَاعِلُونَ. Said that we will ask his father for him. We will do it indeed, right? So fundamentally, that becomes a condition for the future, not now. So in other words, so Yusuf actually trades with them. They bring their goods, their silver and other things like that, and they trade it for the grain. But he tells them that if you come back next year, right, try to get enough for 1 year, and the next year if you come back and return, I'm only going to give you more if you bring your brother with you to prove that you're not lying about who you are, right? So this is what the idea is that, so you bring Benjamin with you this time, right, and then it'll confirm that you're not a liar about not being the spy, not being a group of spies. Right? Of course, Yusuf knows they're not spies, but it's fundamentally he just, this is what he's going about, the way he's going about things, and to eventually sort of reveal who he is, right? So then the surah continues. وَقَالَ لِفِتْيَانِهِ اجْعَلُوا بِضَاعَتَهُمْ فِي رِحَالِهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَعْرِفُونَهَا إِذَا انقَلَبُوا إِلَى أَهْلِهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ فلما رجعوا إلى أبيهم قالوا يا أبانا منع منا الكيل فأرسل معنا أخانا نكتل وإنا له لحافظون. So now Joseph told his servants, put their merchandise in their saddlebags so they may recognize it when they return to their people, so that they might come back. So in other words, so they're packing their grains. Yusuf tells his servants, and actually Fityani, he actually slaves, right? Which is probably the better way to translate it, because that's more accurate. Which again, what's interesting is that Yusuf himself was a slave. You'd think that, okay, well, if I was a slave myself, though, I should be against slavery, but he wasn't against slavery, and that was the case of most people throughout history, right? Because generally it wasn't as harsh as of course, as we know it through what we know through the American slave trade, right? And of course, sometimes it's harsh in other places too. But fundamentally, so here Yusuf has his own slaves, right? He has his servants, or he has his slaves as well. He tells them that when you're pack their saddles, also the money that they gave us, the silver that they gave to us, put it back in those things, put it back in their saddlebags. So that once they get home, they'll recognize that they haven't paid us. So they recognize they haven't paid us, so they'll feel guilty. This whole idea is that they'll feel guilty about, okay, oh my God, we took these things, this grain from the Aziz, but we haven't paid them, right? And if we don't take it back and repay him, give him the money that we owe him, he may either send someone after us, or he'll punish us the next time we come, right? When we go back to Egypt, right? So fundamentally, that was the whole idea. This part of his plan, That at least that's one reading of this. Now, another reading of this is that Yusuf alayhi salam, he restored their money because he wanted to ensure that once they return, they would have something to trade the grain used to trade with the grain, right? That they buy the second year. Right? Another interpretation is that the reason they did this was that he himself that he fundamentally he knew that they would come back because of the Sharia. Their teachings of their own Sharia was that you give a substitute, right? You don't exploit. You don't exploit the people in sales. So you have an obligation, a moral obligation to return those things once, or at least to give a substitute for the thing that you purchased from that other individual, what you bartered from the other individual, right? So وقال لفتيانه اجعلوا بضاعتهم في رحالهم لعلهم يعرفونها إذا انقلبوا إلى أهلهم لعلهم يرجعون فلما رجعوا إلى أبيهم قالوا. Right. So then when they returned to their father, they said, Father, the allotment has been refused us. Send our brother with us, and we will receive an allotment. We will take care of him. So here, يا أبانا منع منا الكيل. So the kale measure of the volume, the measure of the allotment, he says here, has been denied us, right? In other words, for the future, not this year. So send with us our brother Nektal, so that we can also bring back an allotment. We're going to protect him. The word will protect him. Right? In other words, so this is the condition. So otherwise we're going to starve to death. Right? If this famine continues, we're not able to get grain from Egypt, and this is where it is, we'll probably end up starving to death, right? And then he says to him, قال هل آمنوكم عليه إلا كما أمنتم على أخيه من قبل فالله خير حافظا وهو أرحم الراحمين. He said, shall I trust you with him when it will only turn out like when I trusted you with his brother before? God is the best protector, and is the most merciful of the merciful, right? So in other words, he's still sad, and he's traumatized in some sense, or depressed, we can say, about the loss of Yusuf, alayhi salam, that Yusuf is gone. So now his brother from the same mother, you now come to me asking me to take him with you, right? And I let you take his brother before, and you did not come back with him, right? And then you gave me this big story about how he was eaten by a wolf, which I don't believe, right? Why should I trust you now? I didn't, I trusted you then, and you failed me. You did not fulfill your promise. Why should I trust you now? That's right. وَفَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا or خَيْرٌ حِفْظًا, خَيْرٌ حَفِيظ. There's different qira'at. فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا. It's tamyiz. وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. In other words, despite everything, Yaqub is prepared to send Binyamin with them, right? Because so in other words, I'll leave it in Allah's hands. خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا. Allah is better as a protector, right? I can try to protect, Binyamin, just as they tried to protect Yusuf, but it didn't do any good, right? He was trying to protect Yusuf, said, no, he can't go out and play with you guys. I'm afraid something's going to happen to him. No, until finally he lets him go with you, and then something happens, right? But it didn't happen because I didn't keep him home. It happened because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had another plan with him, right? So Yaqub, of course, we can say that he's learned a little bit in this sense, in that, say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he can do what he wills. It'll hurt me that if Binyamin also is lost, right? But we leave in Allah's hands. وَلَمَّا فَتَحُوا مَتَاعَهُمْ وَجَدُوا بِضَاعَتَهُمْ وَرُدَّتْ إِلَيْهِمْ قالوا يا أبانا ما نبغي هذه بضاعتنا ردت إلينا ونمير أهلنا ونحفظ أخانا ونزداد كيل بعير ذلك كيل يسير. Then when they opened their baggage, they found their merchandise returned to them. So here's the silver. They discovered the silver's there, that they were supposed to utilize to pay for the grain. They said, Father, what could we desire? This is our merchandise returned to us. We'll feed our families and take care of our brother, and we will add a camel load. That is a small amount. That is small amount. And some say that this last part, that is a small amount, is a statement of Yaqub alayhi salam, and that fundamentally he's saying that a small camel load in exchange for my son, if he doesn't make it back, is a very small amount. That in itself, my son is worth more than a camel load of grain, right? So if I send Binyamin with you, and it doesn't come back, then you're telling me that you're going to go and you're going to have an additional camel load. Why? Because you have an additional person. Because the deal is that every person is able to walk away with a camel load's worth of grain. So if Binyamin comes, it'll be 11 camels as opposed to 10, right? So you have an additional camel load, right? And so Yaqub says that's a small amount. That's not enough that's not a good, big enough exchange for the loss of my son if he happens to get lost, right? But on the other hand, the other reading is as it is right now, that that the brothers say this, that they respond and say, this is this is a small amount. The camel load, an additional camel load is a small amount. بضاعتنا ردت إلينا لما افتح متاعهم وجوء إليهم بضاعتهم وردت إليهم قال يا أبانا ما نبغي. The ma itself استفهامية, so what do we desire? هذه بضاعتنا ردت إلينا. So this is here our commodities, our goods, they're returned to us. وَنَمِيرُ أَهْلَنَا وَنَحْفَظُ أَخَانَا وَنَزَّارُ كَيْلَ بَعِيرٍ. So they're trying to convince their father also in the same way they convinced him before, and say, listen, don't worry about it. There are 10 of us, and if a wolf attacks Yusuf, and he gets eaten the shreds, then then we deserve any punishment or any loss that comes to us, right? Because there are 10 of us. There's no reason for you to think that we're not going to bring him back, right? So they're similarly trying to make an argument to go, this is why you need to allow him to go. But here, technically, we can see Yaqub is already inclining in that direction to begin with. But then he goes on and says, قال لن أرسله معكم حتى تؤتوني موثقا من الله لتأتونني به إلا أن يحاط بكم فلما آتوه موثقهم قال الله على ما نقول وكيل. He said, I will not send him with you until you give me a promise, swearing to God that you will bring him back to me unless you are surrounded. Then when they gave him their promise, he said, God is witness to what you say. God is witness to what you say. So unlike the first situation with Yusuf, he didn't take from them an oath, but rather in this situation, he took an oath from him because he doesn't want, listen, you lied to me the first time. You probably can assume that they're continuing to lie about what happened. Maybe they never revealed what happened. Allahu A'lam, right? It's unclear. But in this time, if you're lying to me, then you got to deal with God. Right? You got to give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You lie to me in Allah's name, then you're going to have hell to pay, right? لن أرسله معكم حتى تؤتوني موثقا من الله. And you get a mawthiq from Allah, لتأتونني به إلا أن يحاط بكم, right? That you give me that promise that you will bring him back unless you're completely surrounded or you're overwhelmed by an enemy, which meaning that either you're all are taken captives or you all are killed, right? In your attempt to protect Binyamin from being taken, right? فَلَمَّا آتَوْهُ مَوْثِقَهُم. And so this time they give him an oath. قَالَ اللَّهُ عَلَى مَا نَقُولُ وَكِيلٌ. Allah, God, is witness over what we say. He's wakil. وقال يا بني لا تدخلوا لا بني لا بني قال يا بني لا تدخلوا من باب واحد وادخلوا من أبواب متفرقة وما أغني عنكم من الله من شيء إن الحكم إلا لله عليه توكلت وعليه فليتوكل المتوكلون. He also said, my sons, do not go in through one gate, but go in through different gates. But I cannot help you at all against God, for the judgment is God's alone. It is in God that I trust, and let the trusting trust in God. So he's telling them, okay, well, when you reach the city, when you reach Egypt, don't enter Egypt from the same point, right? You should go in from different places, not all 10 of you in one place, right? Now, he didn't tell them this the first time, because the first time, no one expected that there would be notice, and then Yusuf would do what he had did with them, and then accuse them of spying. But the second time, the assumption is that, okay, the people, they recognize him. They had already seen that Yusuf had gave them fair treatment, a special treatment when they arrived the first time, that he took them in and he gave them a meal, despite the fact he was speaking harshly to them and he was suspicious of them, right? So, but this time around, when they come in, people also know, okay, well, this is a special delegation, right? And especially if they see and notice all 10 of them coming at the same time, then itself will be a source for the evil eye, right? In ayn al-haq, as the Prophet said, that the eye is real. فَلَوْ كَانَ شَيْءٌ سَابِقَ الْقَدَرِ لَسَبَقَتْهُ الْعَيْنِ. That if there's anything, if there had been anything in a race with qadar, then the evil eye would beat it in the race, right? But of course, qadar, it overrides the ayn, right? Because nothing, the effect of the ayn, it happens by the qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Prophet made it clear that the ayn is real. And having the ayn, or you can give a person ayn not only because you are envious of them. You can give a person ayn because you are amazed at the way that they look or what they have, right? Right, so person can be completely healthy, and all of a sudden it's, oh my God, mashallah, how beautiful you are, how handsome you are, right? And itself can actually make someone sick, and or you're healthy, but now you become sick, you become frail, develop some type of disease. That this is something from our deen that we believe it. It's that sihr itself is real. Sihr is real, right? The ayn is real as well, right? So the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam basically was trying to help them to avoid receiving the ayn. So go and enter from different gates, from different doors, not from the same door, from the same gate. But then he said, وَمَا أُغْنِي عَنْكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. But despite that, I cannot help you at all against God. In other words, despite my direction to you, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can determine whether or not you'll be affected by ayn, right? Or that some misfortune will befall you because of ayn. Then that's why he says, "In al-hukmu illa lillah." The judgment belongs only to God. For the judgment is God's alone, right? So if Allah wants something evil to befall you, there's nothing you can do about it. If He wants good to happen to you, there's nothing anyone can do to prevent it from coming to you as well. مَا أَصَابَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُخْطِئَكَ وَمَا أَخْطَأَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُصِيبَكَ. That whatever afflicts you would not have missed you, and whatever misses you would not have hit you. Right. So you take your you take precautions, but then you put your tawakkul, your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after that, and then he says, alayhi tawakkalt wa alayhi falyatawakkal al-mutawakkilun. So it is in God that I trust, and let the trusting trust in God. Right? So if you're a mutawakkil, then you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after taking, of course, the means, or you're taking the precautions. Aqal wa tawakkal, that you tie your camel and then you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that once you've done everything that you can, you exhausted all of your material means in order to protect yourself from things, then you just wait for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to judge and rule in your favor or against your favor, right? There's nothing you can do about it. وَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَهُمْ أَبُوهُم مَا كَانَ يُغْنِي عَنْهُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ إِلَّا حَاجَةً فِي نَفْسِ يَعْقُوبَ قَضَاهَا وَإِنَّهُ لَذُو عِلْمٍ لِمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. When they entered as their father had instructed them, it did not help them at all against God. It was just a need in the soul of Jacob. Right? إِلَّا حَاجَةً وَلَكِنْ حَاجَةً فِي نَفْسِ يَعْقُوبَ قَضَاهَا. Right? In other words, so once they did what their father told them to do, of course, doing that really, of course, doesn't protect them against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what Allah intends for them to anyway. But at least for Yaqub alayhi salam, that he himself was able to fulfill a need that he had, right? And that need was to grant them at least the best of advice that a father can give a child on how to protect oneself from harm. Right? He said, and so for he is imbued with knowledge, and as much as we taught him, most people in contrast do not know. Right? So Yaqub himself, of course, we know was Nabi and Anbiya. He's the father of the 12 tribes. And what's interesting too about this surah, it's the 12th surah in the Quran, and the 12 brothers, which are mentioned in the story, and it focuses on those 12 brothers. But then it says, وَلَمَا دَخَلُوا عَلَى يُوسُفَ آوَى إِلَيْهِ أَخَاهُ قَالَ إِنِّي أَنَا أَخُوكَ فَلَا تَبْتَئِسْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ فَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُم بِجَهَازِهِمْ جَعَلَ السِّقَايَةَ فِي رَحْلِ أَخِيهِ ثُمَّ أَذَّنَ مُؤَذِّنٌ أَيَّتُهَا الْعِيرُ إِنَّكُمْ لَسَارِقُونَ. When they entered Joseph's presence, he receives his brother as a guest. He said, I am actually your brother, so do not be grieved about what they've been doing. So here, Binyamin, right, he arrives because that's his condition. So it's year number 2. We run out of food, run out of grain. We returned to Egypt to give our grain, to get more grain. So, but we remember your condition. Our fathers allowed our brother Binyamin to come with us. He's here. So when he arrives, Yusuf, he brings Binyamin close to him, and he says to him, "Ana akhuk, ana akhuka, fala tabta'is bima kanu ya'malun." Do not be grieved. Do not worry about what they used to do. In other words, don't worry about the belittlement, the slights, because naturally this is what happens. So first and foremost, the first harm that they do to Binyamin was that they got rid of Yusuf. And so he was growing up. He grew up as the lone child, the only child, right, of his mother, right? He wasn't like them. They all had brothers from, the same mother, but his own only brother was gone, right? So that's the first harm they did to him. And then naturally, one would imagine is that because they wanted the exclusive attention of their father directed on them, that they probably were very harsh towards Binyamin in the same way they were harsh towards Yusuf alayhi salam. So this is the only thing that we would, make sense here, is that why would Yusuf say that to him had it not been for the fact that there was a certain type of abrasiveness involved in the way that they were treating Binyamin, which was similar to what they had done with Yusuf alayhi salam. فَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُمْ بِجَهَازِهِمْ جَعَلَ السِّقَايَةَ فِي رَحْلِ أَخِيهِ. Then when he had supplied them with their needs, he put a drinking cup into his brother's saddlebag. ثم أذن مؤذن أيتها العير إنكم لسارقون. And then a crier called out, "Hey, caravan, you must be thieves." In the biblical version of the story, fundamentally what happens is that they come to Yusuf and to have their brother with them. Yusuf invites them for lunch. He's nicer this time around. And so he acts as if he believes them. This time that you're no longer spies. They have a lunch, and each of them, are given a massive amount of food. Binyamin is given more food than anyone else, despite the fact of him being the youngest. And he has, of course, this conversation with Binyamin, and he tells Binyamin in secret, in private, that I'm your brother. And I'm still, of course, I'm trying to teach them a lesson. And I have a plan, and that plan is I'm going to place my goblet or my cup, right, my suwa in your bag, and then once you leave, I'm going to send some guards after you, and they're going to track you down, and then they're going to look through your baggage and luggage, and they're going to find it in your bag, and then because of that, you're going to be forced to come back. They're going to force to bring you back, and you become my captive as a result of that. But you're not going to be my captive. I'm going to take care of you. Don't worry about it, right? So, but just don't tell them anything about it, right? So this is fundamentally what happens. So they leave after their lunch. They're headed back to Canaan, but then he sends his servants after them again, tracks them down, and then he accuses them of theft. Oh, you caravan! Hey, caravan! You must be thieves. You must be thieves. Turning to them, they said, "What are you missing?" And, so they turned to these people, these servants of Yusuf alayhi salam, said, "What are you missing?" قالوا نفقد صواع الملك ولمن جاءه ومن جاء به حمل بعير معنا به زعيم. They said, "We are missing the goblet of the king. Whoever produces it will have a camel load, and I will guarantee it." Right? So the head of those guards makes this promise that that whoever brings it, whoever finds it, they're actually going to get rewarded if they bring it. So the nafqidu suwa' al-maliki. The suwa' is the same as the siqaya, as mentioned before. The siqaya and the suwa' are the same thing. The suwa' is a goblet big enough which holds about what we call a metric sa', right? Which is, of course, the 4 of these, right? The amount of grain that can be held in the hands, 4 of these handfuls, right? A sa', so that goblet, it was of gold or silver, so someone stole it. And so basically, he promises that whoever brings it, you get a reward of a camel's load of grain. And I will guarantee it that you receive it. So قالوا تالله لقد علمتم ما جئنا لنفسد في الأرض وما كنا سارقين. They said, by God, we did not come to cause trouble in the land, and we are not thieves. Tallahi. So tallah, to tab before Allah, because a form of qasam, right? Because tallah wallahi billahi. Tallahi is utilized usually for what we call ta'ajjub. In other words, the individual who's swearing, utilizing the tab, is that you swear because something happened to actually cause a sense of wonderment or amazement, in your mind. So it's Tallah, laqad alimtu ma jitna li nafsida fil ard. That we swear by God, we didn't come to cause trouble in the earth, to spread nusira fil ard. Wa ma kunna sariqin, and we are not thieves. So how do we know? How does he know that they didn't come to spread corruption? Oh, well, he knows they didn't come to spread corruption because they came back and they returned the money. Because that was, even though it's not mentioned in the Quran, that is part of the story as well. That they brought back the money and they gave it back to them. They said, well, they offered to give it back to Yusuf and say, well, this was what we were given for our goods the last time we came, and so we offered to return it. And they also brought their brother as promised. So there's no sign of them being spies. They're good doers, right? So why would you accuse us of being thieves now? قالوا فما جزاؤه إن كنتم كاذبين. قالوا جزاؤه ما وجد في رحله فهو جزاؤه كذلك نجزي الظالمين. They said, then what is to be the recompense for this if you are lying? They said the recompense for it is he in whose saddlebag it is found. He is the recompense for it. Thus do we penalize wrongdoers. So what does it mean by this? What do it mean by this? So the recompense is he in whose saddlebag it is found. In other words, and so when they say, and thus do we penalize wrongdoers, these are the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam speaking. So fundamentally they're saying that this is according to our Sharia. Right? Our Sharia teaches us that if an individual steals something, and then if we discover the stolen item in that individual's belongings, then that individual is to be taken. And in particular, the person to be taken and to be made the slave of the person from whom he stole for a year. That was the rule, the Sharia. It's said to be the Millah of Ibrahim. The Sharia of Ibrahim taught this, is that you steal from someone, you get caught, or they discover it in your belongings, you become that person's slave for an entire year. So that's the way that they rule. This is what we do, the way we handle these things. So I said, okay, all right, no problem. فَبَدَأَ بِأَوْعِيَتِهِمْ قبل وعاء أخيه أو وعاء أخيه ثم استخرجها من وعاء أخيه كذلك كدنا ليوسف ما كان ليأخذ أخاه في دين الملك إلا إن يشاء الله نرفع درجات من نشاء وفوق كل ذي علم عليم ونرفع درجات من نشاء وفوق كل ذي علم عليم. So he began with their baggage before his brother's baggage. Then he produced the goblet from his brother's baggage. Thus did we devise a plan for Yusuf. So it is interesting here. So we talked about all throughout the Quran, this surah, Allah repeats many words. So for instance, one of them is kaid, right? You saw the kaid of the brothers of Yusuf, saw the kaid of the Nisa, right? In the kaid of Kunna Azim, right? And so here now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Kitna li Yusuf, that we advanced a kaid for Yusuf. And this itself teaches us that kaid itself, although often has a negative connotation, it doesn't always have a negative connotation, because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he himself is he's devising a plan or a plotting to do something for someone's sake. Then that itself is definitely not negative, right? So kadhalika kidna li Yusuf, and so we know from this, because Allah says this, that all of this, everything that's happening was by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Yusuf, he accuses them of being thieves. Well, first he accuses them of being spies, accuses them of being thieves, and then he comes up with this elaborate plan to capture or bring back his youngest brother. and keep them away from their father. Once again, just like with himself, right? And so it's all by the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وكذلك كدنا ليوسف ما كان ليأخذ أخاه في دين الملك إلا أن يشاء الله. Right? So thus did we devise a plan for Joseph. He could not have taken his brother by the king's law unless God will. So Deen al-Malik means the Sharia of the Malik. In other words, if Yusuf were to judge according to the Sharia or the laws of the king, then Binyamin would just simply have to repay twice the amount of what he had taken. Because that was that rule there, right? But the rule according to the Sharia of Ibrahim was that if you steal from someone and those belongings are found, or that thing is found in your belongings, then you have to dedicate yourself as a slave of that person, or some type of like indentured servant, we would say, for up to a year, right? So Allah says, that He would not allow for Yusuf or for Binyamin to be taken and placed under the rule of the king, right, or to be judged by the laws of the king. Then He says, we raise and rank whomever we please, and above everyone endowed with knowledge is the omniscient one. فوق كل ذي علم عليم أي فوق كل عالم الله سبحانه وتعالى. Right? So above every person with knowledge is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قالوا إن يسرق فقد سرق أخ له من قبل فأسرها يوسف في نفسه ولم يبدها لهم قال أنتم شر مكانا والله أعلم بما تصفون. They said, if he stole, well, a brother of his has stolen before. Still, Yusuf kept this secret in his soul and did not divulge it to them. He said, your position is bad. God knows best what you portray. Now, so here, so once they discover, the goblet is in the belongings in the bag of Binyamin, of course, they're dumbfounded, they're amazed, they're surprised. So it's like, well, our brother's a thief. We didn't know he's a thief, right? Then they say, that makes sense. That he's a thief because Yusuf stole something before as well, right? When he was younger, right? And so Yusuf, of course, he takes great offense to this, but he doesn't, let it show. That he concealed it in himself, right? He did not reveal it to them. He said, Antum sharrum makana. That your position, or you are worse in position. Wallahu a'lamu bima tasifun. That Allah knows best, has better knowledge of what you describe, right? For we see, that God knows best what you portray, or rather, Allah knows best what you describe in this particular regard. What are you talking about? I stole something, right? And so there are different stories that come up in the Tafsir books about what this is a reference to. And so, for instance, there's a story. One particular part of the story is that when Yusuf's mother died, that his aunt, who was the sister of Yaqub, that she became very attached to Yusuf when he was very young, and so Ibrahim alayhi salam, according to the story, he had a special girdle that he passed down to his children. So, for instance, Ibrahim gave it to Ishaq, and Ishaq gave that girdle to his eldest child, which was the sister of Yaqub alayhi salam, right? And so she had that girdle with herself, right? And so at a certain point, and Yusuf stayed with her, that Yaqub decided that, no, I want my son back, bring my son back to my home, and I need to spend more time with him. She didn't want to let Yusuf go, according to the story. And so fundamentally what she did was that she took the girdle and she tied it around Yusuf's body underneath his clothing. And then she claimed that someone had stolen her girdle. So when they found it under Yusuf's clothing, they accused Yusuf of actually being the thief, right? But according to their teachings, their Sharia was that, again, as mentioned before, if you find your belongings, with a thief, then that thief has to become your servant for a year. So Yaqub had no choice but to allow Yusuf to stay with her, even though this was just simply his sister, and for a year. That's one version of the story, one type of story. I mean, that story that, okay, it was their grandfather on his mother's side. His maternal grandfather was an idolater, and Yusuf apparently stole an idol from him, and he smashed it to pieces and he hid it under someplace in the street. I mean, in other words, there are different stories about this, So in other words, so apparently the brothers are going off of something. There's something that they heard about Yusuf when he was young that made them conclude that that he was a thief, right? So Benjamin's a thief. So it must be in his blood. It's in your blood, that it comes from your mother, right? So Yusuf was a thief. Now you're a thief. Oh, it makes sense, So Yusuf, of course, is extremely offended by this. He said, "Sharrum makan, antum sharrum makana," said that you are worse in position. In other words, you have some nerve to accuse me of being a thief when you guys stole me and sold me into slavery. Antum sharrum makana, right? That you are worse in position than I am, right? Wallahu a'lamu bima tasifun. Allah knows best about what you describe. قالوا يا أيها العزيز إن له أبا شيخا كبيرا فخذ أحدنا مكانه إنا نراك من المحسنين. They said, "O mighty one," and they're speaking to Yusuf because he's the Aziz. "O mighty one, he has an aged father, very old. So take one of us in his place, for we see you as one who does good." And he said, قال معاذ الله أن نأخذ إلا ما وجدنا متاعنا عنده إنا إذا لظالمون. He said, God forbid that we should arrest anyone but the one in whose possession we found our property, for then we would be oppressors. Right? So in other words, one of us instead of them, he said, well, how can you suggest such a thing? Ma'adh Allah. How can you? A'udhu ma'adhan. A'udhu, right? Ilallahi ma'adhan, right? That I take refuge with Allah. I seek a refuge with God, right? From what you suggest here. Yeah. That according to your own teachings, that's not appropriate. So if we were to take someone instead of the one who actually took our property and then punish that person, then we would be unjust according to your own teachings and to our own, and as well as ours, right? As well as ours, right? So anyway, so this, I think this is probably a good place to start, because after this we'll see what happens, beyond that. In that, okay, so Benjamin, he's taken in, and Yusuf, of course, he honors him during his stay. They return back to their father to tell him what happened, and their father has a certain reaction. Inshallah, we want to get more into that during the next lesson, inshallah. But at any rate, appreciate everyone tuning in today and yesterday as well. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He continue to bless you, that He grant you benefit in your time during this blessed month of Ramadan. May He accept your fast and your prayers, your standing at night, and your recitation of the Quran and your charity during this month. And may He grant you overall well-being and grant you protection from any and all of the sources of tribulation in this dunya, inshallah. Wa sallallahu sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.